Good morning and welcome back to English 1102. I hope you're doing well and had a nice weekend. Here in Illinois, we had some beautiful weather on Saturday, and me and the rest of the metro area, I think, decided to go downtown to Chicago and sit in lots and lots of traffic. But I was going downtown to visit my future sister-in-law. She was having a luncheon, and so it was kind of exciting to go downtown, seeing everyone out on the beach and having a great time on a long Lakeshore Drive. But I must say there were a lot of people downtown on Saturday, so it made for an extended visit and a very serene sort of drive back with everyone else. So I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Maybe you were out and about, maybe you were enjoying the fresh air. I hope you had a chance to rest and relax after a busy week of practicing summarizing, paraphrasing, and directly quoting. This week I will be reviewing your work on the summarizing, paraphrasing, and directly quoting worksheets, and I hope that your collecting of research specific to your research questions about your community needs topics are going well. From what I've seen on the library appointments feedback, those were really helpful, and you were collecting an astounding amount of resources that were focused to your research question. They weren't generic, they were very specific, and I also appreciated seeing that your research questions were somewhat shifting as well. And so I've attached in the announcement from last week just a list of some of the things you guys are working on in terms of your research questions. It's wonderful to see the array of ideas and the specificity with which you are attacking these questions head on. Again, you can find this list of sources, list of questions attached to our most recent announcement. You can always visit our announcements under the Announcements tab, and then here's the document with all of the questions, research questions so far. I also hope you got a chance to look at my writing tip from last week on free writing, continuing to just write a little bit as you're reading through your sources. It's really helpful to kind of be thinking about what you're reading by means of writing as you're collecting sources. And then I added one extra video. It was 3 minutes about spotting fake news. I thought the sort of last comment about how to reverse search Google Images was really interesting. I'm not sure if any of you have done that before, but I just wanted to share that with you, coming off the tails of our Unit 7, which was thinking about information literacy and online verification skills. This week in Unit 9, I'm so excited to see how your annotations are going. As you begin Unit 9, we're going to be thinking about this thing called Discourse Communities, which is an important term that comes and appears on our course objectives a number of times. Here at bullet point number 2, and then I think bullet point number 3, and so on and so forth. So this idea of discourse communities, at COD, everyone, the instructors hope that their students leave the course with an understanding of what a discourse community is and how it applies to their projects. Today I'm going to explain that briefly to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing your finished annotated bibliographies nearing the end of this week. Please review my feedback for you on your first annotation that you sent for me last week under your My Grades tab. So that's the first thing to be thinking about this week. And then also, I'd like you to finish adding 3 entries to your bibliography. So you've been doing some research, you've collected one really great source, and I'd like to see 3 other sources, which I don't think should be a problem for any of you, seeing how much research you collected during your library appointments 2 weeks ago. I also wanted to include another sort of fun reading for you this week. It shouldn't take you very long. It's a pretty short reading about what's happening in Chicago to revitalize neighborhoods. So again, another instance of a community needs research question, an idea that's coming to fruition. And I think it's great to see what these community members are doing as a group. This is not by any means a single person working on this problem. It's a group of people. Richard Townsell, who's an executive director of the Lawndale Christian Development Cooperation, Danita Robinson, North Lawndale Homeowners Association, and Amy Touch, leader organizer with United Power for Action and Justice. So people coming together to work on a common problem. This problem here is what to do with land, sort of just barren land that could be potentially used. They call it the vacant lots that they're trying to turn into some kind of housing affordable housing for the area. The reason why I'm asking you to read this short article is because I was hoping that as you're reading, you notice that the writer is doing something in terms of a parallel community. You'll see that a lot of the ideas for the Chicago Coalition is actually mirroring and mimicking something that happened in New York City. And so I wanted you to see the ways in which modeling some of the solutions that they're coming up with for Chicago is based off of something happening in New York. Also, I'd like you to see how your projects, questions that you're asking, might have been posed in communities near us or surrounding us, and what kind of solutions existed. The goal of this class is not necessarily to come up with a solution and fix our communities, but it's really to think about how to address the problems and to think of solutions or ideas that could potentially lead to solutions in a longer larger scope project. So what solutions have come up, or what kind of questions have been asked in communities around you, similar questions to yours, and have those questions been addressed successfully before? I think that's always a good question to ask, right? Has the research been done before? And if someone's already done the experiment, for example, in the sciences, can you duplicate it or make it work for you? And so as you're reading through this article, continue to think about, like, how did this problem in New York, how is it applied successfully or unsuccessfully in the Chicago community? How is your research question relevant both in Hinsdale or Oak Lawn or Arlington Heights? And has any other city considered this kind of project before, and what do they do? It's just good to keep your head above, looking around and picking out strategies from around our region. As you continue to think about parallel communities when you're reading, I also want you to just add one comment. And the comment can be, anything: how helpful was it for this group to model their ideas on a parallel community? What are some limitations of this comparison? And then just one follow-up reply by Friday would be great. So just one comment, one reply based on this reading, based on your focusing on this idea of a parallel community, the successes and failures that are associated with such an endeavor. The other thing I want us to focus on this week, in addition to collecting our resources and composing the other 3 annotations, is to think about this idea of a discourse community. Basically, in English 1102, when we talk about discourse community, we're thinking about who are we going to be writing for? What is your audience going to be? As you continue to collect research, as you continue to think about your research question, in the following weeks, we will be writing letters for change. And those letters are going to be addressing and explaining the questions that you've come up with, potential research you found, and sort of not necessarily solutions, but ideas that you have, and with regard to impacting that particular research question, and you're going to address it to a specific community, a specific audience. And so when we think about discourse communities, we think about a group of people who share values and assumptions and ways of communicating. Here's the official document by the College Composition and Communication Coalition. In some ways, the expression discourse community means exactly what it sounds like. It's a group of people, members of a community, who share a common interest and who use the same language or discourse as they talk and write with. In college settings, we think of discourse communities as connected to disciplinary interests. Because botanists belong to their own discourse, for instance, they write and sound very different from scholars in sociology. But we can imagine other kinds of discourse communities as well. For example, a discourse community of soccer fans, or one of scrapbooking enthusiasts. In the discourse communities of writing studies, though, we also think in terms of writing produced within a given discourse community, especially through genres associated with and defining those discourse communities. We thus would be very surprised to find lab reports in the discourse community of philosophers. So we're thinking about, if we locate an audience, we need to know how to talk to that audience, right? We need to think about what kinds of language, what kinds of approaches rhetorically do we need to include. Do we begin a letter by asking questions? Do we begin by congratulating the person on their recent promotion to a particular public office? I mean, what are some strategies that we need to use when talking to this person or group of discourse communities? When we write, it's useful to think in terms of the discourse community we are participating in and whose members we are addressing. What do they assume? What kinds of questions do they ask? and what counts as evidence. Likewise, it's helpful to think in terms of the genres we encounter in a given discourse community and the ways we can compose within them. So our discourse community is specific to, your research question, but we're writing in an English 1102 class for an audience that would be able to enhance our goals of our community needs projects. And so this week, in addition to thinking about what communities around us are doing to help perhaps answer some of those questions in your own community, I'd also like you to think about who might be able to help us answer or work towards some of these problems. Who is an audience that you could write for? Who is someone in particular that could be your discourse community? Who could you pose as your audience? So again, discourse communities have a broadly agreed set of common goals, has ways to communicate among its members, whether that's email, texting, Facebook groups, uses methods of communication to provide information and feedback, uses email, phone, meetings to communicate, has acquired special words, has special kinds of vocabulary that those users would be familiar with, and have a subtle degree of expertise, a suitable, degree of expertise. So whether that's, as it said in the example, a scrapbooking group, or whether it was a soccer fan club, whether it's sort of a video game community, there's a whole bunch of different ways in which we can talk about discourse, about discussion within a particular audience. As we continue to think about parallel communities, communities that are working on similar projects to our own questions, as we continue to think about who might be an apt or appropriate discourse community to address our problems and questions too. The third thing this week I'd like you to work on is to complete your annotated bibliographies. You've all done one entry, so just completing 3 more entries will be wonderful. Remember that when you're adding the entries in, they can all just be sort of listed together, but in alphabetical order, starting with the sort of last name of each of the sources. So put those in that particular order. And again, here's our rubric. Source selections are relevant and specific enough to your research question, which you're going to state in the title. And make sure that you've checked that title and revised it accordingly to match all of your content. Also that the annotations do have the summary section. I really want to make sure that you have that sentence or two that explains why that source is relevant to your research question, and that you also have 5 to 10 relevant direct questions from the source and research questions, 2 to 3 questions that each source generates. By doing this, I like to piggyback so that when we start writing our letters, you can go back to your annotations and say, oh, here's some important source direct quotations that I've selected. I might decide to paraphrase these. I might still directly quote them or summarize them, but at least you know where in those articles you can return to without having to reread the whole article again. And that the 4 sources are cited correctly. Remember that under our assignment description, I have for you some example citations to help you format your sources. Some of them will be journal articles, some of them will be internet sources, that's fine, but you'll notice towards the bottom, how do I cite a journal article? Here's an example. How do I cite a book? Here's an example. How do I cite a website? Here's an example. Again, I got to that document by just clicking on the annotated bibliography assignment description. Please also note that last week I gave you one way to track your research. I thought this was really helpful. I've seen this only recently, and I thought it was a great way of collecting research. And so just keep this handy, whether it's you're going to use it in your class or maybe a different class. Just thinking about the ways in which even like a lit review matrix template in this particular format could be helpful. You can change, of course, these headings. You could create a whole section for just like quotations that are relevant, but it's a great way if you're trying to think about collecting sources, especially if you're collecting more than one. Say in another class you're collecting 10. It's a great way to keep track of them right in an Excel sheet. I think any kind of strategy for organization is really helpful and can be applied to this course, can be applied beyond school as well. Again, you can find that helpful tool for keeping track of your research here under the literature review matrix template. I just want to say I'm really enjoying working with you this semester. Your topics are wonderful. I'm learning so much. And just for fun, I wanted to end the day thinking a little bit about this week. If you do get a chance to go outside, where do you go outside to? Do you recommend any parks, forest preserves, scenic areas that we might want to explore ourselves? So I'm going to let you know Delnor Woods Park in St. Charles is really beautiful, and Leroy Oaks Forest Preserve is another place to frequent if you're around this area and you have a chance to get outside. I hope you do, and I'm looking forward to working with you more on your research. Thanks so much for listening.